Daniel, welcome to the new revamped Jake Woodhouse podcast.
Glad to be back, or how do we handle this?
Yeah,
I'm glad to be
essentially
talking to you again, Jake.
a guest on the new podcast is how it is.
Yes.
Okay, so where I'm going to start today is a thank you, because you really helped me. And if I wind the clock back, you jumped on Bitcoin with Jake at an important time in my life, which was basically just after the birth of my second daughter. It was like the end of 2022, and I was still working as a shipbroker. And you told me the story around how you read the 4-Hour Workweek and how rapidly your life changed after that. And in particular, there was one part of that book that you loved, which was the failure setting. And I was like, get me the goddamn book. And it'd been sitting on my shelf for however long. And I find it and I'm like, right, failure setting. What? And just like, what's the fucking worst that can happen, Jake? And as you quite rightly point out, it's not likely to be the things that you worry about. So for those that haven't heard that story, let's start there. Why is failure setting important to you, and how did it change the trajectory of what you were working on in your life?
Yeah, absolutely. And I still use it because it's such a great exercise to go through. And like the premise of the whole thing was, we've all heard like the gurus tell you, like the self-help guys tell you, you got to have goals in life. You've got to set your goals. You've got to aim for the stars. You've got to take the moon shots. And if you get only halfway there, then you're still 1,000 miles further down the line. All of this real positive stuff. And Tim just, in his book, the way he was making decisions really resonated with me. I don't know where he stumbled across it from, or if it's uniquely his own. I have no idea. But he set out, instead of goal setting, failure setting or fear setting, I think it might have been called. What's that? Like, he turned it on its head, and Tim does a great job of doing that. And, well, as people listening that have, become Bitcoin investors over the last however many years, you realize we live in an inverted clown world anyway. So if you right the ship, and you can right your mind, and you can start thinking differently. So I was at the point where I'd read the book, and I think probably 5 times in 4 months. And I was going through all of like the little actionable points that I could take from the book, because I wanted to change my life. And so did my wife, and we had 4 children at that time. And we'd come to the realization we were living a deferred lifestyle, which is another thing he talked about in the book. I literally was living the deferred lifestyle. I would walk in, sit down at my desk, turn on my PC, and think, maybe another 10, 15, 20 years max. That's all I've got to keep doing. That's even saying that makes my hands sweat. It's like you're just trapped, right? You literally are a slave to that fiat system. So I started listing down the points. So what was ultimately stopping me from making the decision to quit and take our kids out of school and start traveling the world together, which is what that was the dream thing. If we could do anything, if money wasn't an issue, what would we do? Well, we'd travel the world with the kids. Okay, great. So how do you get there? And I started writing down like the points. What's your biggest fear? Well, my biggest fear for me personally, and it's all in the book, by the way, Choose Life.
Which I've read.
Number one was going broke and ending up shunned by society, living under a bridge, in a cardboard kind of city with my wife and kids. Like, complete and total abject failure, basically. When you look at that, that's where my mind literally went. I let it go there. I said, right, okay, I'm pen and paper. What is my biggest fear? And that's what came out of my brain, through my arm, through the pen, onto the paper. And when you see that, like with your actual eyes, that is very, very powerful. You're like, holy crap. And, thinking about your monkey mind and all that, where are you getting this from? But if it's there, if it's in your subconscious, and that is your fear, then the next part of the exercise is, well, what are the next 3 steps that you're going to take to rectify that situation, if it were ever to happen? And well, then the realizations just start unfolding. It's like, well, yeah, how would we ever get in that situation? Like literally living under a bridge, like completely bankrupt, when Both of our parents were alive, both living in houses with at least 3 or 4 spare bedrooms each. Got 4 brothers between us, both with houses with 2 to 3 spare bedrooms each. All right. Yeah, I don't think we're ever living under a bridge anytime soon. So if the worst happened, then yes, I lost everything and went completely bankrupt, then at least we've got food and shelter. We're warm. And then what? Well, I'd have access to a telephone, and I've got this whole network that I've built up with an 18-year career behind me. I think I could probably make a few phone calls and follow the breadcrumbs to find a job pretty soon. So what am I actually worried about? Where did that fear come from? That was complete and utter total nonsense. But until you start breaking it down and looking at it logically, using your logical mind, that you can start breaking down these barriers, and it starts all melting in front of you, and you realize that all of the risks are perceived risks. It's all perception. And a lot of it is controlled by social engineering and the societal construct around you, because you're on this hamster wheel, you're running 1,000 miles an hour just to stand still come the end of the month, because you'll never be able to catch up. You're always drowning. There's always something else to aspire to. And until you can step back, figure out, one, what do I want to be doing in the next 5 years? If it's still sat at your cubicle, go for it. If not, then you've got to start thinking logically and getting a plan in place and trying to figure out what it is truly that is stopping you from taking more control over your life.
It was very powerful. And again, thank you, because pretty soon after that time, I quit that job that I was in, and I haven't worked for anyone else since. And I'm now very firmly of the opinion that I will never work for anyone else ever again. And
what was yours? What was your number one? The
very
fear.
similar, similar, like a kind of a financial fear and a fear of like a failure. You know what I mean? It's like you haven't like climbed the ranks and done, your part or whatever. It was essentially exactly the same. It's like, well, hang on, what's the calculation is quite simple. It's like, what's your runway essentially? It's like, okay, I've got this much money in total. How much does it cost to live each as a family every month? Okay, well, that's roughly how long we can last before it all runs out. And if it all runs out, I have a family I can fall back on both sides that will help us out. And it's very quickly like you're putting yourself under immense pressure for something that no one else gives a shit about except for yourself.
Yeah.
And you realize that even that person that's putting the pressure on yourself, i.e. you don't even really care about what it is you're trying to do. And so, Daniel, I want to ask, have you heard of a guy called Gary Stevenson?
Doesn't ring any bells.
Okay. I was hoping it might, but it doesn't matter that it hasn't.
Is he the economic guy, the British
Gary
guy?
Economics, yes.
Right, okay, yes, I have. Yeah, I've been paying very little attention.
No, and you shouldn't either. But what was interesting to me, and it reminded me of you recently when I read his book, and I also had Ben Gunn on the show a couple of episodes ago as well, who's been in a very similar position, as like a financial broker. This guy, Gary, was a Citibank trader doing interest rate swaps from like 2007, 2012, something like that. And he's like, anyway, I won't go into his whole story, but what it brings back for me is such fresh memories. I mean, I was a shipbroker. It's very different to the FX markets where you spent time. But I completely resonate with this idea of like, it's basically a make-believe world. I've actually been in central Sydney the last few days, and I'm walking around with my family at like Tuesday, 10 a.m. And I've got like 3 kids falling off a pram, and we're charging around doing stuff. And you've got all these guys in their corporate gear, very efficient looking fellas. They're obviously kicking goals in their own world. But you walk along and like, you just up there on floor 20 fucking whatever, they're playing a game. And they're playing it with someone 2 streets away, who's playing it with someone 2 streets away, who's playing it with someone in Tokyo, who's playing it with someone in London, whatever. And it consumes you completely until you go and read a book like What Happened with Yourself. And you go, hang on a sec. the fuck am I doing? Is this it? And I remember that so clearly. So I don't know if any of that resonates with you, but you should read Gary's book, because it will take you right back to like what it was like as a broker looking after traders and the egos and this whole system that exists to feed not quite sure who, the story about bonus time, and no one's really sure how bonuses are figured out, but somehow they are. And you know the story, right?
Oh yes, yeah. All too well, and yeah, it does resonate. Just that little tidbit there, and yeah. Well, I started my career in London and then spent 15 years in Singapore. So the bulk of it was in Singapore. So I know exactly what you mean, walking around between the skyscrapers. And I remember going back we left in 2014. Actually, like 3 days ago was 11 years to the day that we left. We left Singapore. Fun fact, we flew out of Singapore the same day that Malaysian Airlines MH370 flew out of Kuala Lumpur and went missing and has never been seen ever since. Yeah. So there's a weird connection to that. And I've done a podcast episode with Ashton Forbes about that. But anyway, that's just a little side note. We were back in 2017 and I thought it would be fun to go upstairs and just surprise the guys on the desk, because they were pretty much all still there. At GFI at the time, before they merged again. Well, another merger, centralization in that arena, as you know. So all I ever saw throughout my whole career was centralization of the banks, of the brokers, absolutely everything. So yeah, sure enough, I went up to the skyscraper and walked through the front door and got up to the barriers and handed over my whatever ID I had to the girl at the front desk to get my lanyard, to get through the turnstile, to get to the lift well, to press the button to the lift, and then get in the lift and press number 22, I think it was. Mate, it was such a visceral feeling. My hands were tingling. I was getting like sweaty palms, and I was thinking, what is this feeling? My heart started racing differently, and anxiety probably is the only emotion I could probably ascribe to what I was feeling. Being back in that world after, what was it at that point? 3 or 4 years
5
away
years.
from it, felt so alien. And I got upstairs and I walked through the doors and all sat there. I'm like, all right, guys. It was as if no time had passed. And I just sat down, started clicking in some lines, started catching up with some old customers. I might have even quoted a few rates. It was bizarre. Wow. Absolutely bizarre. But yeah, my job was basically to broker foreign exchange options between the world's biggest banks that people know. And that, I remember, must have been 2011, 12, all of these doubts started creeping in. And so what are we actually doing? Like, actually, if I just disconnect myself from all the adrenaline and all of the endorphin rush and all of the depression and the highs and the lows that you experience every second of every day, especially in foreign exchange, because it's constantly moving, you can't think straight. And the only thing you're thinking about is what is going on that particular exact second. You live second to second. And if you can get in the flow state, that's where you get, really good at like figuring out the whole pattern. It's just a pattern. It's just pattern matching and matching buyers and sellers. That is just a weird state to be in. And yeah, I just remember typing to one of my clients, probably the most unprofessional thing you could probably do, like on an open chat line, which is being recorded, everything, obviously. It's like, Dave, what are we doing? Like, actually, we're just moving numbers around screens, Like this morning, you bought $30 million of like 1 month dollar yen. What does that even mean? And then you bought from him and sold to them, and like that's gonna expire in a month's time, and we're just moving numbers around screens. Like, this doesn't make sense to me anymore. In fact, did it ever make sense? And I have no idea, because I hadn't read the book at that point, and I had no idea where that was creeping in from. probably having the kids, I would imagine, and just thinking about time differently, because everything changes as soon as you become a father. And yeah, that was that was the moment. And then one of the big other moments was when there's just a big change at work, and people become intolerable to work with, either in the office, on the desk, or even on the client side. And you just started really, there was not a moment of joy throughout the day. And you're talking, you're at the desk at 6:30 a.m. and then leaving at 5:30 p.m. and there's no breaks in between, and it's full on. And then, as you know, you got client dinners or networking events or whatever you've got to be at. And that creeps into the weekend, and you are literally just running 1,000 miles an hour on that hamster wheel. And as Rob Brinded will tell you, you're on that hamster wheel, and all you're trying to reach, like Tantalus, love, happiness, and belonging. And the faster you run, the further you get away from it, because the wheel is just spinning under your feet. And that was just kind of realization that I needed to make a big change somehow.
And that's where the title of your book, Daniel, is so good, is Choose Life.
Yeah.
What you're describing is, it is your life. Like as if you're the breadwinner or the salary earner for the family, you've got to be in there all those hours of the day for the week. And then equally, like the kind of the client schmoozing side of it, as you said, it can creep into weekends, or suddenly you plan holidays around being at like functions and whatever. And not the same markets, but shipbroking is very similar. The best shipbrokers, it was their life, absolutely inside out. And if you weren't willing to take that approach, actually you just weren't as good. And then you're losing ground anyway. So 11 years has gone by. And so to bring it to like the present day, did you ever imagine you would have got like the opportunity to do all the things you've done since, like when you're sitting in that day job?
No way, man. The book is called Choose Life. We left in 2014 and we started traveling. And within a year, I must have been asked, goodness knows how many times, by friends, family, people you'd even meet along the journey. It's like, oh well, this is all very well. You've made this decision. You're doing the thing, but when are you going to come back to real life? I was like, my God, like, I've never felt this is real life, guys. This is it. Real life isn't sitting at a desk in an office for 11 hours a day. That is just awful. That's terrible. So that's where kind of the idea for the title of the book came from. It kind of resonated with me. It's like, no, we did choose life. And obviously there's a Trainspotting reference there from the two films where Ewan McGregor has the whole choose life monologue. I love that.
Oh, okay.
And
great movies.
It's nothing to do with abortion. I've had some Americans like turn their nose up at the book because there's a whole Choose Life campaign about abortion in the. I was, not privy to that, so it's just a bit of an unfortunate. And other people think it's something to do with Wham because they had a George Michael and I can't remember the other guy's name. No one ever can, right? They had a song called Choose Life, and there's T-shirts with Choose Life. But
no, really, it's a book about failure setting.
Right.
That's what it is. Yeah. Gosh, so cool, isn't it? And so I resonate very strongly with that part of what you talked through. Just to explain to people, because you can 100% dig up the episode I did with Daniel before, because you go into very nice explanations, like how you're moving, when you're looking at currencies, and then you start asking, like, well, what is money? How does this all make sense? And it's that inquisitiveness that I think is so crucial, because some people, they literally don't even take that step. And that's okay. That's up to them. But when people start to take that mindset, that's what I find really interesting. So teach me a bit, Daniel, as you're traveling with your kids, you decide to leave that job, like Bitcoin pops up at some point. But do you think it's an inquisitive nature in you that asks these questions? And in particular, obviously you run a fucking awesome podcast that I've listened to for a long time now. Did you ever envisage yourself podcasting, for example? And how did that come about?
Oh, no, I didn't ever think I'd ever be hosting a podcast. That was
Obviously,
we'll get
guys,
to
go
that
and listen. If you haven't heard of Daniel before, go and find his podcast.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, the Once Bitten podcast. So we'll get to that one in a second, and I'll address like the other part of the question, which was thinking, am I inquisitive? I think we all are. We lose it. It's beaten out of us through the school system. Creativity is certainly beaten out of us through the school system. And if anybody wants to go and check into, what I'm saying here, go and watch Sir Ken Robinson's TED Talk from 2007. And it's titled, "Do Schools Kill Creativity?"
Wow.
And Sir Ken himself was a professor, right? So he's coming from within the system to talk about this. And that is still, to my knowledge, is still the most widely watched and downloaded TED Talk of all time. So definitely, a red flag.
Yeah, I haven't heard of that. I'll go and check that out.
Yeah, go and watch that. It's like 20 minutes, brilliantly delivered. Unfortunately, Sir Ken passed away back in 2020, 2021, I think. So he's no longer with us. But I have had him on the podcast as well. So if you just search Once Bitten Sir Ken Robinson, you will find that. So for me, why did I start looking at Bitcoin? Well, I'd ignored it for so long because I was sat at my desk brokering foreign exchange, the real money, guys. Like, internet geek money. What is this all about? Like, there's all
you guys just don't know what you're talking about.
No, shadowy super coders like sitting in basements somewhere thinking they can make like money. Like, what you can't just invent money. This is ridiculous. We already have the dollar and the euro and whatever else. Like, how many touch points did you need to realize that your mind was completely upside down? I was sat on dollar mark. This is where I started. Foreign exchange, spot markets. So before I moved across to options, I was on the spot markets. And that means basically the deal is just done there and there. It's not like 1 month out to 1 year. It's boom, spot on the spot, basically. And that was dollar mark. And that was the biggest market. The US dollar against the Deutschmark was the most widely traded currency by an absolute country mile. The second was dollar yen. And all of a sudden, flick of a pen, Deutschmarks don't exist anymore. Nor do French francs, nor do Belgian francs, nor do Dutch guilders, nor do Spanish pesetas, nor does Greek drachma, nor does Italian lira, nor does the Portuguese escudo, nor does the Irish pound. Gone. And I saw all of that happen obviously as a young trainee, and I saw people lose their jobs left, right, and center. And I didn't question for 1 second, like, how did all of these fiat currencies, didn't even know what fiat currency meant, how did all of this currency just go to zero? I didn't even think about the 65-year-old guy that had been working in Spain or France or Belgium or Holland his whole life to protect his family. All of a sudden, what he'd worked for his whole life got changed overnight to a different unit of account. I lived through that and I didn't question it. And in comes the euro, the all-conquering euro, right? Yeah, it's all right, guys. We got you. We're going to have the euro. And that gets priced, goodness knows how, in the different countries. You can't imagine the political jockeying that was going on between the different heads of state at that time on how to reprice people's life's savings and pensions, and what they're just getting turned over by bureaucrats. And then if you fast forward to when I left, I'm sitting there, ignored Bitcoin for probably 2 to 3 years because I just thought, no, it was absolutely ridiculous. You can't make money out of thin air, yada, yada, yada. Didn't look into it. But then when I did leave and I was pushed into a corner by my own doing to find a store of value, I'd done all the other stuff. I had funds. I had physical gold, physical silver. I thought I was doing everything right. Thought I was being very prudent, even though I was quitting my career and taking my kids out of school, traveling. I still thought I was doing all the right things. with regards to trying to store wealth. And sure enough, as I kept on learning about, how do we store value, I was following Real Vision in the very early days because Grant Williams was a friend of mine from Singapore and he was co-founder. And they started bringing people on about Bitcoin. And I saw interviews back in 2015, it must have been, with Tour de Mista, Trace Mayer, Wences Casares. Then I just got hungrier and started looking for more, found on Andreas Antonopoulos. And, there wasn't much around in those days, but it all started clicking for me. It's like, oh shit, this is something completely different here. And this is something I need to take a lot closer attention to. So now if we fast forward to today, and just 3 days ago, I believe it was, where Christine Lagarde has made an announcement about the euro going to the digital euro and how they want to push that out by October or something ambitious. You're watching it all play out again. So the euro came in to be a currency across the continent 1st of January 1999. So here we are, just over 25 years later, and they're going to replace it. It doesn't look like it's being replaced because it's still going to be called the euro, but it's going to be called the digital euro. They're literally, what they're doing is completely destroying the euro, which completely destroyed all of those other fiat currencies. How many, I don't know how, probably a century at least, had the French franc been around, the guilder, the peseta, the Belgian franc, centuries probably. And they were gone overnight. Now you've got the euro, that's not even lasted 26 years. Now they're going to take it to digital. So they're just absolutely doing the same thing again, destroying what they created to create something new again, to perpetuate this fiat Ponzi scheme and to enslave people even further, because it's all going to be digital and on your phone and it's for your safety, but it's going to be programmable money that will expire and you'll only be able to spend it on certain things and taxed at, point of earning it or spending it. So,
or on unrealized gains.
Yeah. So it's very, very concerning and something that people really need to be aware of and awake to, and figure out, why Bitcoin is different and what they can do to start protecting themselves against the inevitability of, how many times do these people need to prove to you that they are willing to do whatever it takes, by any means necessary, to enrich themselves and, completely rug pull nations on the currencies and the value that they've managed to accrue over their careers.
It is wild, that, isn't it? Thinking back to when the euro was first created, and even today, are you able to say where you're now based?
Yeah, we're in Southeast England at the moment.
Yeah. Okay. And so so you were in Singapore, you traveled the world. I know you spent a lot of time in France, now back in the UK, which is obviously no longer part of the European Union, basically every sense. And there are a number of problems that have cropped up as a result of that. But it's just a mess, isn't it? The whole thing. You've got very clear nation states working with a monetary union. Who is the European Central Bank? Who are those guys? And I completely agree. The precedent's there. If they want to just tear it up and start again because it suits them, then they're going to do it. And equally, some stuff in the news recently, trusted or not, about rearmament. Okay, right. Where's this all going? Right? It's they're going to finance weapons. Surprise, surprise, and they're going to stealth tax the population with inflation through programmable money in order to do that. It's just a same playbook, but slightly different solution. In terms of your move to the UK, is any of that influenced by these type of things that we're talking about? Because obviously choosing where you live is such a big question to answer. It's something that my wife and I talk about all the time. And there's no perfect solution, only trade-offs. I'm intrigued as to what thought process you might have gone through there. And I'll come back to the podcasting question because I want to get through that.
So I get asked this a lot, if you clearly have decided to choose life and do whatever you want and live wherever you want. So like, why here? Or we were 8 years in France, and many people were like, well, why France, dude? That's like a socialist hell pit. That's ridiculous. Like, strange decision. And the answer is, yeah, like you, I've come to realize that there is no utopia. There is no magic place to go live. There is no magic wand. There is no citadel, right? There is no, it is all trade-offs. So I gave up even trying to look for the utopia, because you will drive yourself crazy. Oh, in a perfect world, I would live here and we'd have 100 acres of land and 25 acres of that would be forest, and there'd be a river running through it, and we'd have cows over here and sheep over here.
Regenerative tend to themselves. Obviously, you wouldn't have to look after them. They just kind of work in the background.
Exactly. We'd have a little landing strip over there, helicopter pad, blah, blah, blah. It's ridiculous where your mind will take you. There's no switching it off. So we gave up with that, and we just kind of like followed the wind, I suppose. And every country is going to have its ups and downs. Every country is going to have its downs. I pay as little attention as I possibly can to the political sphere, because that is just a cesspit.
And it's just showboating, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. And if you are not dependent on their decisions because you do not hold their currency, then it literally, you're outside the system. It sounds kind of glib to say, I suppose, but it doesn't matter what they do or say, because I don't store my time or my wealth in their systems. My time is mine, and I don't use their currency. Well, yes, you do, because you need to buy goods and services and groceries and whatever else, but you're storing your value in a different system, in Bitcoin. And they can move interest rates around as much as they like. They can, quantitative easing as much as they like. They can move mortgage rates and whatever else as much as they like. That's not ultimately, over the long term, going to affect your. In fact, it's going to make positive effects on your Bitcoin when you are pricing it in the currency of the country in which you live. If they're forever going to inflate that currency, which they will, they're going to debase it. So it's always going to go up in value over time to what you hold in Bitcoin. So you take that worry off your head. And what brought us here was opportunities for the kids. My oldest daughter decided that she wanted to pursue a degree, and found a course she wanted to pursue in London at a university there. So that was one that was kind of like pulling us in this direction. And as you know, we homeschooled all of them at different stages throughout their education. And at the moment, our two 14-year-olds are going to what's called a Sudbury Valley school. So that's a democratic school where it's just 3 days a week, and it's for families that have chosen to live outside of the state education sphere, and
Cool.
and use homeschooling, unschooling, world schooling to their advantage. And in Europe, it's very difficult to find these places. In the UK, it's still fine. So they were coming of an age now where they wanted to be around other kids, like-minded kids, but still be in some kind of quasi-learning environment. And the only place we could find was here in the Southeast. Actually, there are a few more dotted around the country, but this one was better located for what we needed. And it's like, well, okay, these kind of decisions are, these kind of scenarios are kind of leading us down this path and this decision-making process of where's going to be next, where's going to be best for us over the next 2 to 5 years. And that's why we are where we are at the moment. And I can't tell you what we're going to be doing in 5 years' time, whether we're still here or in a completely different country. Things are going to move very, very quickly. And it's very interesting for Bitcoiners that are invested in not just the protocol, but the whole ethos, the mindset. And you're going to get attracted to, I believe, Bitcoin friendly jurisdictions, and they're only becoming more and more, and they're only getting more and more solidified. Obviously, El Salvador is the poster child, but hearing great things about Costa Rica. You have incredible work going on in Madeira. Madeira's what Andre's doing there with Free Madeira initiative is amazing. He's going to be opening a fund so people can invest with Bitcoin and keep Bitcoin in a fund for minimum 5 years, and that unlocks a passport, that unlocks a visa for your whole family as well.
Oh, cool!
And it's very
interesting. Like a Plan B passport Bitcoin fund.
Yeah,
awesome.
It's like very interesting proposition.
Thing. Wow!
And they've got now, I think, anywhere between 150, 200 merchants, could be even more.
Accepting Joe's recent video said about 150, I think, merchants on the island. Yeah. So I've been looking very closely from a distance. I haven't yet been, but I listen to your podcast as well, so I follow it closely. Yeah, cool.
So that's just the way. That's why we ended up here. I would say the wind blew us here, and we were just open.
But that makes lots of sense, though, is that your children's education is one of the most important, if not the most important, decisions you can make for them, right? There's only so far you can allow them, but they're just not mature enough to make decisions seriously in some ways. I'm about 10 years or so behind you, and my eldest is 4.5. We're very much in the mindset that at least the first 7 years doesn't matter. I.e., doesn't matter where they are. And the moment that we let them out of our sight as the primary caregiver, we release control to someone else. You have no idea what their ethics and morals are. You have no idea what they do in their spare time. You have no idea what they actually do with your child. There's also this bananas thing in Australia with no jab, no play. So if you haven't taken all the infant vaccines, you can't get into the government-funded daycare centres. So that was another major reason why we decided if we didn't follow their vaccine program, we couldn't get entry into their childcare system. Wow. And therefore we had to do things a bit differently. That's mad. It's a whole other rabbit hole we could touch on if you like. But
happy to.
We know that the main decision for the location we choose is really around children's education. And so we'll probably do something very similar. What's really caught my attention, though, Daniel, my time is mine. That is massive, right? And you compare that to the Daniel Prince of 16 years as an FX broker, but that just isn't true. So when your time is your time, what do you choose to do with it? And I frame that from very much like an investor perspective, what we choose to do with our attention is the most important thing we can do, pretty much. And therefore the ROI on your time, especially when your time, is even more important, because you could be doing something else you prefer. So what do you spend your time doing? And how cool does it feel to say, my time is my time?
Yeah, it's so freeing. When we started traveling, I would say, about the first month, it didn't set in what we'd done. It just, your monkey mind was still on holiday. You just thought you were on a nice holiday and time away
4 weeks.
Yeah, right. And then all of that kind of started tumbling down, and all the negative thoughts started coming back in, and it was a real battle to realize that you are your own master of your time. So we spent the first 2.5 years just solid travel. So that's what we did. That was taking up all of our time and everything that come with that, because you're still trying to handle all the, we were home swapping and house sitting our way around the world, right? So some days we didn't have an idea of if we had a roof over our head in the next 2 or 3 days, because we were just trying to piece together all of these home swaps and house.
And then how to get there, and then how to feed the kids, and then, oh my God, yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that was 100% of our time. And we settled down in France, and we were there for about 8 years, and we just started settling into that rhythm. And, your time, I'm still demanded of as a parent, right? I still, we cook everything from scratch. So that takes time. Shuttling kids to and from wherever they need to be, that takes time, but it's still your time. And actually a great aha moment over the last year has been Ross Stevens wrote his yearly investment letter to his customers, but he open sources it and everybody can read it. And Guy Swan on his podcast does a great Bitcoin Audible, does a great job of reading these out. And Ross was talking about like the stuff that's demanded of you. We've all got to-do lists, I'm sure, right? Always got something to I've got to do this, got to do this, got to do this, got to do this. And he said, well, the mind switch that you need to play on yourself is instead of a to-do list, just right at the top, I get to do.
Mm.
So now when I'm thinking, oh, I can't believe I've got to pick the kids up. Perfect example. My daughter now, a 17-year-old, has got a job at the local restaurant, hotel, really nice place, and she's loving it. But her shifts are Friday, Saturday, and Sunday night from 6 p.m. to 11 p.m. And the only way she can get to and from is yours truly, right?
Yeah.
So there's my Friday, Saturday, and Sunday nights. So the old me would have been, oh, this is egregious. I can't believe my time is being trampled upon by somebody, this external force and yada, yada, yada. But like, it's not, no, I get to do this. I get to take her. I get to spend that 15 minutes there and 15 minutes back. And I get to be able to, help her onto the next journey of her life so she can be at this good place of employment and she can start making a network. This is so fleeting as well. She'll be driving herself probably in the next 6 to 9 months whenever she's passed and ready to go. So that's the kind of thought process that goes on. Personally, I try and get to the gym an hour a day. So there's always something for me personally. You've always got some kind of administration to deal with as well. So always trying trick myself into believing that I get to do this somehow. And the podcast takes up a lot of my time. I could be recording anywhere between 1 to 3 episodes a day. And that could be anywhere between an hour and a half to 5 hours, as you know. But and selfishly, that's more of a therapy session. To me, it's not about like, oh, I've got to get the scoop on, what this guy's thinking, or there's a new person in the Bitcoin space and I want to get to them first. It's never about that. I don't care about that. It's not, I've got to get this, or I've got to be a little bit contentious with this guest and I know how to trigger them at this point. I hate all that bullshit. I just want to have the conversations with people, record them and put them out. And I find that I just get so uplifted and positively affected every time I have these conversations. So yeah, that's just a little bit of an insight into what we do with our time. And obviously we do still travel a lot. We try and get to the conferences and that takes up a bunch of time too.
This is a nice segue to hit up the podcasting stuff. So I'm completely in agreement with you about how more often than not, I'll finish a podcast and I'll feel great. Like really fucking great. You're like, God, that was cool. Someone like yourself, we have yet to meet in person, but I know the day that we do, it'll be fucking awesome. And actually, when you do this regularly with lots of people, that's the same kind of vibe that you get with a lot of them. And in particular, the ones I like the most, I think, are obviously people who are willing and able to look at Bitcoin as like a very valuable asset and have significantly moved their life towards it. And also the kind of the people that were already down the alternative health rabbit hole, and they're looking at spirituality and they're looking at meditation and they're looking at like traditional holistic ways of doing things. And then Bitcoin comes very naturally. And those two things I find the most exciting to explore. But Daniel, if anyone was thinking of starting a podcast, like any tips for them? And equally just me, selfishly, like, so do you contact all of your guests yourself and do all the scheduling and do all the editing? And like, how do you choose who to have on the pod? Are you trying to pump out a certain amount per month? I don't know. Just I'm intrigued as to how you produce the whole thing.
Yeah. So how and why did I start it? Again, I probably procrastinated for about a year, which seems crazy, right? For the guy that quit his career and, in air quotes, chose life and figured it all out and was living life on his own terms, there I was procrastinating about starting a podcast. And what was stopping me? Fear.
Yes.
Again.
Yeah. Every time. Yeah.
I mean, I've written a fucking chapter about that shit. This is how like strong it is.
Hello, read your own fucking book. Yeah. Jesus.
This is how strong it is. And you know, people probably heard other people say it's all in your mind, or it's you holding you back, it's you in your way, look in the mirror, all of this kind of stuff. But it is true. And I found the same with the podcast. I suddenly realized, my God, I'm just doing everything I used to do. Like, I learned nothing from like the last when did I start? 2020, 6 years. 6 years of living life how I wanted it to be lived, and I'm bowing to my monkey mind yet again. Like, that pissed me off. So it was, right, no, fuck it. I'm going to start a podcast. I'm going to record a conversation and just ship it and see what happens. And that's what I did. I'm lucky I didn't fall into the trap of, all these how to start a podcast courses on Udemy or anything like that, because then you definitely won't, because they're gonna talk you through, this is what you have to do. You have to buy this equipment, blah blah blah. And you're like, well, that's $5,000 worth of equipment. Like, what, on a flyer? That doesn't make sense. But no, what was my barrier to entry? Zero. I had a laptop, I had a set of earphones, and they had a mic.
That's all you need. Yeah.
That's it. And I had a Zoom account.
That's literally what I'm doing right now. It's a set of headphones and a laptop in a hotel room. Yeah, you don't need much.
That's exactly what I realized. It was me and my way, and so I just reached out to a few people. Twitter DMs.
Yeah, Twitter's amazing.
No one knew who I was. No one knew what my agenda was. No one knew that I really cared that deeply about Bitcoin. I've been on Bitcoin Twitter, shouting and screaming, I guess, with some of the other plebs, but nothing of, true value. And sure enough, people will say, yeah, I'll come on. I'll come on your show. And that's just how it all started. And the first couple of episodes were downloaded 400 or 500 times. It blew my mind. I'm like, God, this is crazy. And then people that I'd read their books, I reached out to them and they happily came on. And that was it. I haven't looked back ever since. Awesome. And I still, to this day, 5 years in, I do the scheduling, I do the reaching out, I do the editing. I try and edit as little as possible. I literally just press upload and go with it. Just drag a link into YouTube, put it on the YouTube channel. I don't try and clickbait that stuff. The thumbnails are generally just screenshots, unless a pleb has helped me out. Ben Weeks, big shout out. He's helped me out with a few thumbnails. But I've refused to fall into the trap of paralysis by overanalysis and try and get into the game of gaming the algorithms to get more clicks, release at a certain time of day, only release on certain days of the week, try and track where the other Bitcoin podcasts are being released and try and time. No, that's all fiat stuff as far as I'm concerned. I have the conversation. I find it valuable. Somebody else will. And I'm of the belief that it's going to be out there forever, and someone's going to find it when they need to find it, and it's going to resonate with them, whether that's an interview with yourself or whether that's an interview with Jeff Booth or Lynn Alden or you name it, or a pleb that no one's ever heard of. They're the more powerful ones, I think. The complete anon
agree
Bitcoin
completely
pleb
agree. Yeah,
that has come out of nowhere and
says, by the way, I just built this thing. You're like, what?
yeah, exactly.
Tell me
Yeah.
more.
They're the great ones. So yeah, that's how the pod started, mate. And
Cool.
yeah,
Well done. Well, I don't know. I have a web page somewhere with all the Bitcoin content I've ever consumed that I liked. So I'll be able to look up how many Once Bitten podcasts I've been through, but it'll be a fair few hours, I'm sure. I'm with you with the whole, like, don't bother playing the click game. Like, definitely focus on creating high quality content. That's cool. But really that translates just real conversations with real people. And it's actually not extraordinarily difficult to do if it's what you like doing, bizarrely. And that's why I touched on before we click record. For me, this reincarnation of my podcast, so to speak, is hopefully something I can do very long term, and is always going to be about what I find interesting. And if that's true, then it's likely other people will too. But as soon as it's like, okay, because I remember, what's he called? Entrepreneurs on Fire. What's the name of the guy? Anyway, read his book, went through a whole lot of the stuff. It's like, right, okay, first you've got to have an avatar. Who's the person? And he tells this whole story about, he was thinking about this guy and make up a name, Bill. Bill was like commuting to and from a boring job, wanted to find out about entrepreneurship. And so he created this whole game of, like, create something for this one person, and then everything will fall into place. But my view is if you do that, you're doing it for someone else straight away. So is that really going to be something you can keep doing long term? And someone like yourself tells it how it is, and it doesn't require like tons of graphic design, doesn't require tons of over editing, doesn't require any of that. It just requires you to sit down and spend 5 years. Is that how long it's been talking to people?
Yeah.
Wow. And so one question to that being, what are 2 or 3 outcomes from this experience that you didn't expect to come from it?
My daughter asking questions on the show.
Yeah, that's really cool. Nice touch.
I didn't have that. I didn't have that on my bingo card, and that happened naturally. So
yeah, I feel like I heard a story. You said I couldn't tell her why I wasn't. Oh, you were going into the spare bedroom the whole time. She's like, "What are you doing in there?" Like, come with me, basically. Or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'd be like rushing my dinner down. Right. No, I've got a podcast interview in like 5 minutes. So sorry, I can't help clear up. So you make sure you help mummy clear away and blah, blah, blah. And that just kept happening. And that was obviously a shift in my behavior because I'd started the podcast and it was all new. And I was just more positive about everything, probably easier to be around. But kids are so intuitive. She clearly noticed a shift in what I was feeling, what I was doing, my emotive state. And she must have just been intrigued by it. And she just asked, "Oh, well, can I come in and see like who you're talking to and ask them a question?" And I'm like, yeah, absolutely. She was 9. And I'm like, yeah, of course. Like, let's go. And that was Andy Edstrom. And that was the first time I'd interviewed him. We were talking about his book, Why Buy Bitcoin? And she asked the first question, and she's asked the first question. If she's not been around, one of the other kids has substituted from time to time. So they've all been a part of the journey. And to me, it was like, well, how's the guest going to react to a 9-year-old kid being on the podcast? I was new to it. Right? These are professional people, right? All of a sudden the screen's going to open up and there's some dude they've never heard of in his spare bedroom with his daughter on his lap. She used to sit on my lap and ask the questions. But they loved it. The nice, way that they interacted with her, even like Saylor, Jeff, people you think that are like really honed in, professional businessmen, wouldn't have time for kid stuff.
Yeah.
Just amazing. And
cool.
She would ask the question and they would have to, and Safe as well. Safe, another perfect example. You think of Safe as just like Mr. Professional, you're going to get the answer, blah, blah, blah. But like as soon as you put a 9-year-old question in there and he's like trying to explain it as you would need to explain it to a 9-year-old, and that is very valuable to the audience that's listening, especially if it's a very in-depth, like tricky thing. She asked Parker Lewis the first time she spoke to Parker, like, Parker, what's a hedge fund? I had no idea. That was just complete swerveball at Parker. He's like, oh shit. I've only ever explained a hedge fund to like an adult, and
right, you see the brain work. Yeah. So it's such a great organic thing to have happened, isn't it? That's why it's so cool. Yeah.
Yes. And that is one huge surprise for me, and I'm very thankful for that. And the other thing is the value it's accrued to me personally is priceless. Like, it doesn't matter the unit of account of like how many dollars there are to a Bitcoin or whatever else. Like, we're addicted to putting a price on something, right, or a value on something. It's priceless to have these conversations with the friendships that you end up making. You know this from doing yours. Like you said, we've not met, but we feel like mates.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's crazy, and I wouldn't replace that for anything. The people that I now call close friends. Canute, have you seen Canute? You're in Sydney at the moment, right?
I didn't see him this time around, but I met Canute when he did Bitcoin Alive the first time. Yeah, absolutely.
So Canute and I talked about this, I think, like deep into a few beers at a hotel bar or something after a conference. And, Canute, he likes to get philosophical. He's like, one of the biggest takeaways from this whole thing is like, all I did was lean into the space a little bit. I wrote a few articles and that become a book. And now I've quit my Fiat job, which I didn't like, which took me away from my family. And now I get to do this, and I get to have these conversations, and I get to meet people. I was 48. I never thought I'd make another friend again in my life. You're done, right? You've got all your school friends, and you've got all your colleagues and whatever else. I'm making friends now, and friends like that's even like kind of redefining the meaning of the word friend in my mind. And you can't put a price on that. You just can't. And so that is the value that I've also accrued from doing the podcast and, meeting. I guess if you want to translate into like that Fiat terminology, your network is your net worth. I find that pretty kind of is awful.
It's a bit
thing
cheesy,
to say.
isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. But
I've heard people also say it's not what you know, it's who you know is now obsolete. Yep. It's now who knows you. So it's the ability to put content out there is like a digital breadcrumb, essentially. And so people can find you. And that just amps up the feedback, essentially.
Mm-hmm. And if you want to flip your network is your net worth, well, mine, I don't look at that as people anymore. The network is Bitcoin. And that network, not only does it hold the value of the Bitcoin that you've accrued, but that attracts the people to it too. So we are the network, and that's it's very, very powerful.
I've evolved slightly in terms of how I think about making investments, and I now talk about financial, humanistic, and intellectual capital. And those being your like three major buckets. And essentially investing in humanistic capital is like having kids, and intellectual capital is your skills. And those two then drive financial capital. It's about like super long-term family wealth planning type strategic stuff. And when I look at Bitcoin with Jake and the 80 episodes I did from roughly the middle of 2022 to 2023, the financial returns weren't all that obvious in year one, in that I got a little bit of sponsorship money for it, which paid for a producer. But the intellectual allowed me to make a reallocation process and sell things and buy Bitcoin, because I gained huge conviction as I was speaking to all these different people. And then if you could then say that there's like a fourth maybe, which is a social capital. And the network of people that I came across and was able to connect with through the process of podcasting is priceless. Like, startup opportunities came from that, investment opportunities came from that, friendships came from that. And now I look at that that podcast is basically a huge primary research project that helped me make a life-changing investment decision for me and my family. And that wasn't obvious at all when I started recording the first one. And actually, Knut was episode number 1. So shout out to him for, responding to a Twitter DM to a random guy who'd been pumping out tweets for a year or so. It's cool, isn't it? Wow.
It's so true. And it's why I want other people to start podcasts.
Yeah, I think there's not enough podcasts. I completely agree with you on that. Every person speaks differently to other people. Mm-hmm. And I think that the cool, well, at least from my perspective, is it doesn't really matter who it is that resonates with you, more just like something resonates. And this is when it gets a bit woo-woo about like, okay, well, what frequency are you actually operating at? And can you raise your vibration? And if you can do that, different people come into your life that weren't previously accessible. And with that comes wisdom that wasn't previously accessible. And in some ways, like that whole idea of like the teacher appears when the student is ready, it's totally true. And it can even be around like the content you're consuming. And you can literally increase your awareness and your knowledge and improve your decision making by doing that. And it's like, that's completely wild, right? And that's not something that comes out of a Fiat textbook, but more like a trial and error thing. Mm-hmm. I don't know, does any of that resonate? Like,
absolutely.
Do you think resonate, different, like higher quality people appear, right?
Yeah. Well, think of that word resonate. I mean, what does that mean? It's a resonance. That's
does
frequency,
it feel?
right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. I've been going down this rabbit hole. Why? Because I speak to people. Like I've had Samakato on the podcast. He's the spiritual guy. The other guy that came on, Caleb, more recently, and they're all talking about like how they're raising their consciousness, and how that just naturally happens when. Well, if you think about like the fiat world, there's such a, like you were talking about walking around Sydney, those frequencies, they are low level frequencies, right? That they are just, like you're surrounded by the concrete and the steel and the glass, and you're surrounded by people that are just on survival mode, just trying to get the next big thing and trying to get the the VIP ticket to this, that, and the other thing, or they're trying to get the next promotion on the corporate ladder. Like that is, on all of that is built on a foundation of fiat currency that's being debased every single second of every single day. Perpetual debasement, perpetual inflation, because every time somebody signs a new loan, there's inflation into the credit supply, which obviously the money supply is going to have to like just keep inching up. And so how much credit is being taken out in the system? Right now, somebody just signed a new mortgage. Right now, somebody just bought a new car. Right now, somebody, washing machine, sofa. It doesn't matter. It's happening. That level of frequency is so low. You can't survive on that. You can't prosper. So when you switch your mindset into a monetary system that is the complete inverse of that, and you get your time back, and you can start reading, and you can start listening, and you can start watching YouTube channels, whatever it is, and having these conversations or listening to them. It's like you move up the chakras almost, like one at a time. And I couldn't tell you where I am in that journey. Certainly higher than before, like way, way higher. And, going down all of the rabbit holes of energy and following the work of Jack Kruse and how he talks about light and how that affects us as well. It's all so interesting and something I would never have been exposed to if it were not for finding Bitcoin and deciding to start a podcast. And I've had Jack on the podcast, but I've listened to him on 10 other different podcasts, and that's 10 other different conversations, like you said. It doesn't matter about the guest. A conversation is never going to be the same, and you're going to pull something out of someone completely different to what
Yeah.
I'm going to pull out of someone.
Yeah.
And it's just going to naturally go that way. And it's not going to feel scripted because
It's not.
they never are.
Yeah. But organic is the best by a long, long way. What I think is really coming across here, which is so key, is again, it's your time. But by choosing to take the risk that was to quit that rat race, and by doing your failure setting or whatever you need to do to make that step, it's then and only then that the space for new creativity opens up.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe this will help bring us back to the TED Talk that you touched on.
Mm-hmm.
Because I want to talk a bit about homeschooling and a phrase I've heard you use before, which is like, if you're going to homeschool, you don't bring school home. And it's this idea of creativity. Like without the space, there's nothing new can come in. So maybe you can paraphrase the TED Talk for me before I even go and watch it. But like, what does that mean to you? Like, how much more creative have you been able to be personally? And equally, when you look at your kids, like, what have they managed to go ahead and do that you wouldn't have been possible without that additional space?
Yeah, absolutely. Just to put a cap on the last point, I had Jeff Booth on just 2 days ago. If nobody's heard
I got it
Jeff,
starred. I haven't listened to it. I thought I'll listen to it before I speak to Daniel.
Right. For those new to Jeff, he wrote a book called The Price of Tomorrow. And we were having a very frank discussion because, and I've titled the episode, I realized I was a hypocrite. And that's what Jeff said, because he realized he was still, he had a foot in both systems. And it wasn't until he realized that his actions of still being on boards in the fiat monetary world was perpetuating and feeding that system. So he come to this like huge realization, like, oh my God, what am I doing? Why am I spending any time or energy here? Because I'm part of the problem. And I think it's going to hit home with a lot of people, especially hearing it from someone like Jeff, who, is very well known in the space. So yeah, go listen. I think you'll really enjoy it. The homeschooling conundrum. 2020, right? Everybody gets locked down and the kids aren't allowed to go to school. And schools start, so schools start sending emails home to the parents. So now the parents are the teachers. And a lot of people believe that is homeschooling. Where, to your point, that's not. That's school at home. Homeschooling needs another word, really, because school is a thing that happens in an institution. Like learning doesn't. Teaching happens in an institution. Learning doesn't. No true learning happens in that institution because basically you're being force-fed information, and it's all under compulsion. And if you look at the UK system, man, it's weird. Like walking around here, 25 years being away. When we went to school, the state schools, school uniforms were just creeping in. I think like at the private schools, which are actually public schools, there's a whole private-public weird thing going on here, right? They were all like suit and tie. But now, mate, like everywhere you go, I'm seeing like 8-year-old boys walking around in full suit, tie, and work shoes. And you think to yourself, my God. And the girls, same things. Ties, knee-high socks. I don't know what the fascination with tartan is, but always a tartan skirt, blazer. What are we doing? Like, there's no... So the kids get to the age of 7, let's say, and then they have no choice over what they wear for 5 days a week. Like, how do you think that sets your mind up to go into that institution where you have no choice who you sit with because you've been split up into classes of 20 to 30 people. So you're on survival mode immediately because you're wearing something you don't like. You would never choose willfully to wear that. And you're forced to kind of like pick friends between a very small group of people. I've got to get on with someone in here. Otherwise, this is going to be 5 to 15 years of complete hell. And you're forced to learn about things that you have no interest in, no real interest. It's like You have to be here at this time, and you're on somebody else's timetable always. So there's no learning. Like, you've switched off the Inquisition. Like, no Inquisition allowed, little Johnny. Zero. Park that at the door.
Creativity killed.
Absolutely destroyed, but by design, Jake. By design. This all comes down to the social engineering aspect of how do you build a compliant and easy to manage society, in air quotes, whatever that word should mean. And sure as shit, the easiest way you can do that is to get the kids from the youngest age as you possibly can off the parents. Get them away. And what you were telling me is very frightening about this in Australia, that you can only enter these institutions now if you've jabbed your children with a concoction of what they decide goes in their bloodstream. Like this, how far?
Yeah, it's wild. I mean, it's really wild. No jab, no play is it's the most egregious government regulation I've ever come across.
And that's
it's
the
literally
tagline.
called
I
that.
can't believe
it's called
they
no jab, no play.
tagline.
Yeah. And I don't know how many jabs they're required to have, but the primary school system, I think, starts at roughly the age of 6, at which point the regulations are different. So for give or take the first 5 years of a child's life in Australia, I think it's not every single state. There's 7 different jurisdictions across the country, but certainly where we have lived, 99% of the different daycares that you'll drive past, like, they're not available to us. And of course, there are communities that pop up in and around that you can find and all the rest of it. But yeah, absolutely. You have ceded control as to what goes into the body of your child from pretty much birth. Like I can't remember exactly what they all were, but yeah, I mean, that's a whole other podcast about the different ones that they want you to take and why they don't necessarily make sense and how they run out before they're 10 and then you have to do it again. And, it doesn't make any sense. And when you say, I don't necessarily want to do that with my child, they're like, cool, well, if you don't do it, then you can't get into our daycare. Now, we're fortunate in that we knew that was going to happen. We can make decisions to solve that problem. I'm at home full time because I managed to get my time back too. And that's largely thanks to Bitcoin. But yeah, it's wild, right? Gosh, what a rabbit hole that is, the whole school thing. And then I get to like, why do I know what I know?
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever asked yourself that question? I'm sure you have. I mean, I've heard you say it many times on your podcast.
Yeah, and almost none of it from the 15 years I spent in state education. It's wild, mate. Honestly, like when you start peeling back the onion of why this system is in place and the way it is run and the way it works and what it's actually designed to do, you can find yourself in a pretty dark place. So here's the misnomer. We were told or accused of being irresponsible parents when we made the decision that we made. We're going to take our kids out of school. We're going to go traveling, and well, what about their education? Well, we'll do it. We'll world school, we'll unschool, we'll homeschool. Like this is a thing. Like people do this, and this was 2014, and there was way less information out there than there is today, and way less tools to use. But we figured it out. We managed. And people were like, well, you're being irresponsible. And then you think about it. You're like, wait a minute. Actually, I'm being totally responsible. Like, if you look at the definition of the word, like, this is on me now, right? I am responsible for their education.
All day for your child, because you're looking after it all day.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's full responsibility, 100% responsibility. Whereas before, I was irresponsible because I had outsourced all of that to the state or to the private school or to the Montessori or to the daycare, wherever it was, It was like, all right, yeah, wash my hands of that now. Yours for the next 7 hours. And by the way, if there's any bad grades, I'm going to blame the teacher, or I'm going to blame the child.
Yeah.
Total irresponsibility, right? So that mindset switch was very powerful. It's like, shit, no, this is all on me now. I am responsible. And to tie that into Bitcoin, like you separate education from state, you separate money from state. These things are intertwined. Like if you do one, you will do the other. I don't think there's any going back. And same with medicine. If you separate,
it's everything,
like
essentially.
Yeah. If you separate, like if you so a book that you might want to link to is called "Hold On to Your Kids" by Dr. Gabor Mate.
I've listened to a bunch of his stuff.
Yeah, he's incredible, and he co-wrote it actually. And so you've got two child psychologists weighing in on this particular subject, and and for those of you that like your Austrians, go and download the free book from Mises.org or buy it. Is Murray Rothbard's Education Free and Compulsory. Well, we both know nothing's free.
Yeah, you're the product. It's just wild, isn't it? And that's where you talk about this word social engineering, which to some people's triggering on itself, right? Social engineering? What are you talking about?
I'm my
conspiracy
own man.
theorist. So, okay, mate. How far do you take it? Like, obviously, I'm affected as well. There's one area I want to touch on before we say goodbye, which is something that I'm starting to delve into a bit more. But if the hurdle rate for an investment is Bitcoin, and depending on what time frame you take of the last 5 years, roughly, you're looking at give or take 50% compound annual growth rate, which is a lot more than, the bond yield of a couple of percent, right? Or is a lot more than even a stock market might give you with an index fund. You touched on during the conversation, playing around with your gold and your silver and listening to Real Vision. You've obviously made other investments in your lifetime. How do you look at the idea of trying to outpace Bitcoin? And do you ever get involved in any other investing in the ecosystem or elsewhere to Bitcoin?
Very good question. Back in the day, mate, when I was first trying to figure all of this out, I don't know how far back some of your listeners will remember, but back in 2017, we had the whole ICO shitcoin phase.
Yeah.
I got caught up in that. That was a real shame.
It was hard not to.
I'd started investing in Bitcoin and was trying to do all. There was so much noise out there. I'm pretty hard on myself. I should probably let it go a little bit more. But I was trying to do the right things. I was still in the fiat mindset. I was trying to diversify within this new sector, this new exciting sector. I was trying to diversify. I was trying to stock pick. I was trying to not stock pick, coin pick, and figured out that now I can listen to the CEO, or I can listen to the CTO, and I would watch videos and videos of presentations by Dash, for example,
different white papers, and
yeah, all of that kind of stuff, and getting swept up on the idea that blockchain technology is the underlying invention here, and everything's going to go on the blockchain, and just be ahead of the sector that moves there first. And a lot of shipping chat, right? You'd have seen this, I'm sure, like decentralized ledger technology and all of that kind of crap. Bananas on the blockchain. I remember reading in The Economist, I think.
Yeah, logistics stuff. Yeah,
logistics. Right. Yeah. So okay. So imagine you've got a boat leaving port in Australia, and that's got to get to Brazil, and it's got to pass through certain ports along the way. And just imagine if the cargo can go on the blockchain, and that's exactly what it is. And then when it gets to the next port, that gets updated, and then that gets absolutely confirmed again that all the cargo is still there, and there's been nothing lost at sea, and there's been no thievery or anything like that, and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, this is going to revolutionize the way that we do business on a global scale. Supply chains are going to be the tightest they've ever been, and blah, blah, blah. So I was always looking for the next best thing. Over time, that's all gone away, man. Like, there's only one game in town. So how do you outpace Bitcoin? Well, the only way you outpace Bitcoin is if you're still accounting in US dollars in the back of your mind. Many of us don't do that anymore, right? Many of us are like, well, that's always going to go up anyway. And I don't want to sell the Bitcoin back out for worthless pieces of paper. So like that's one mindset. Another mindset is, do we buy the companies that are now investing into Bitcoin and following the MicroStrategy play, and get exposure to all of that upside in the stock market? Which, if you understand that they're going to print a shit ton more money, and you understand that that means the stock markets are going to go up, and you understand that any company with a shit ton of Bitcoin on their balance sheet is going to start posting incredible profits over the next year because the accounting rules have changed, then yeah, you're going to get enticed into honing into some of those companies. How that plays out, I can't tell you, but it's not buying and holding Bitcoin. That it's incomparable. There's nothing else that, not even another coin, right? That people can say, oh, well, I'll just buy and hold XRP or Ethereum on my cold storage wallet and whatever else. But no, they are completely different things. You may as well just be buying a stock. It's completely centrally controlled. So yeah, it's very. So you said earlier, it was through doing the podcast that helped you build conviction that has made you do some, probably what other people would look upon as very risky investments. Maybe you've sold out of other long-term investments. Maybe you've sold property, whatever it is that you've done. Other people are going to look at you like you're freaking crazy because they've not gone through that. They've not gone through the learning journey yet and found the conviction. Both you and I have the conviction. And it's very, very difficult when you have that conviction to talk about or recommend anything else. And when you've got newbies coming to you and asking you for advice, they're like, oh no, I don't want to invest in Bitcoin. I just want to invest in the stock market. You're like, well, why? What's stopping you? Oh, this, that, and the other thing, all the usual excuses. So to that person, I would say, well, then are you at least investing in the companies in the stock market that are building their business on, a Bitcoin balance sheet? And then they look at you like you're crazy again. You're like, okay, so how are you going to get to that level of conviction? Because if you don't get to that level of conviction, you're going to sell your Bitcoin. And you're going to sell if the price rockets to $150,000, you're going to sell because you don't have the conviction that's going to $1 million. If it goes down to $50,000, you're going to sell because you don't have the conviction that it's not going to zero. So you're going to get caught on either side of that scale. So without the conviction, without the diamond hands, you're going to be relieved of your Bitcoin. And I think over the next 18 months, we're going to see wild swings. We now have 11 ETFs in the US alone with huge interest in the dollar price of Bitcoin. We now have a whole government in the US with huge interest on the dollar price of Bitcoin. We have a handful of US listed publicly traded companies with huge interest on the dollar price of Bitcoin. And they have the power of the narrative because they can write the headlines and move the price, which we saw Trump do by announcing on a Sunday some Bitcoin news. And this has huge ramifications because we've just got like Wall Street now and Wall Street equivalents around the world entering into this space, and they're all going to have huge interest on the dollar price of Bitcoin. So my message is, you better build your conviction and you better build it quick. Otherwise, you're going to be shaken out. You're going to be shaken out. And who's going to hoover that Bitcoin up? Because as soon as you sell that onto an exchange, it's going to get hoovered up by an ETF or a publicly listed company or a government that is buying it for their reserves. So think about that.
It's a fascinating time to be watching, isn't it? I think what I'm kind of trying to feel out is, I guess, I love the question, ask a man what he owns, not what he thinks. And if I reflect on myself, the only thing I've invested in that isn't Bitcoin and self-custody in like literally years is myself, whether that's in personal development coaching or something I want to build, like my podcast, or B, a very small percentage allocation to a speculative equity investment, a company called Matador, which is listed in Canada, which Mark Moss introduced me to. And so far it's been hammered in the penny stocks market, and you can buy it at half the price I paid. So that's hardly a good investment today. I did it to buy and hold for a long time, but the thing I'm trying to feel through, I guess, is like absolutely like figure out Bitcoin first. If you haven't got as much as possible of your net wealth in Bitcoin self-custody, ask yourself why, and keep asking that until you have a good answer. And generally speaking, the more you know, the more you buy. Or where your mind goes, your money follows. And I have not seen a single person who's done the opposite to that. I'd be happy to be proven wrong because I'm constantly looking for reasons why I might be wrong. Find me someone that hasn't gone down that rabbit hole. But maybe, just maybe, if you're sitting on a 4 or 5x return, 5%, do you want to move that into something different? What vehicle might that look like? I don't know. Do you take more risk and go and do, you mentioned Jeff a few times, ego death would be a riskier opportunity, shall we say, and reallocate into some kind of VC style fund to buy equity in early stage companies. That's something that resonates very strongly with me. I'd love to be involved in doing that, I think. But I'm still unclear as to why that beats Bitcoin and self-custody. Just to throw that out there, I'm happy to try. And I do think it's important for us as Bitcoiners to just not hodl everything forever. We have to take some risk.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't quite know how and in what way yet. And that's what I'm trying to figure out. And I think the podcast will...
Right? Yeah. You said the key word there, yet.
Yeah, well, I'm still working on it essentially as a thesis. It's like where do I personally fit in? And one idea I'm really, really strong on is it's a very Fiat thing, this. So it's about evolving. Actually, great example. So what Andre and Gigi are doing with the sovereign engineering cohort is an absolutely excellent example of what I was thinking about. But I went through some Fiat funded startup accelerator programs and basically building companies. And they were trying to get you to shoot for the stars, right? We want you to build the next Google. We're going to put 100 grand in now. We're going to get 10% of your company, blah, blah, blah. What does that look like on a Bitcoin standard? And I think it involves a lot of different things, such as vibration, like raising people's frequency, getting them to actually build things that they want to build, and then helping them with capital. But again, I haven't figured that out yet. So yeah, if any opportunities come up, do let me know because I'm interested to look at them. And you've obviously been in the space for some time now, so you would have seen plenty of different things proposed, I'm sure.
Yes, and you have the fund, like the Lightning Ventures Fund and the Thunder Fund now that they've launched. You have Geyser, which have all of the separate. I love Geyser because of the pleb level stuff. You can send $50 across to someone that's trying to build out a project on Geyser, and that makes a big difference to somebody. But then also I urge you to think about, rather than investing hard-earned Bitcoin into a startup or a company that's resonating with you, offer your time because they need the advice. And I've sat on the board at Relay, who are they're like a swan here in Europe, so you can download the app and buy Bitcoin through them. And it's been great watching them grow and just being at the end of the phone if they were, needed something. Same with Orange Pill app. Matteo started that a couple of years ago, currently looking for investment because they want to grow out the next stage. And I sat on that board with Canute, Nico from Consensus, Natalie, Brian DeMint, who wrote Parallel. And we just meet once a month and we just shoot the shit and like, what's the big ideas? Like, what can we do now? How can we, what's the next UX step? They've just created the wallet. So now people are zapping each other around in the app, which is great. One cool thing is geo-zapping. So I geo-zapped Sydney the other day because I knew Bitcoin Alive was going on in Sydney. Yeah, so cool. I just opened the app, opened my wallet, typed in Sydney. There's like 17 people listed on the app.
No way.
Just sent 21 sats immediately to everybody.
Cool.
With 21 sats, excuse me, with the message, hope you guys are enjoying the conference. Look after my boy Canute or something like that, Yeah. So these are cool things, but that's one way that people can, like yourself, that are looking to add value to the space, can lean in and help. Because why are you investing in it? Are you investing in it because you want to try and make more Bitcoin on the other side, or you want what they are building and you just want to be a part of the whole experience?
That needs to be answered. Absolutely. And it's reminding me of an article that I've referenced recently on this pod. A guy called Daniel Kravitz, I think that's how you say his name, wrote it literally 10 years ago. And it essentially says, like, anything that isn't buying and holding Bitcoin in self-custody should be looked at as something altruistic. So like a philanthropic donation to something rather than, VC style investment. Because the ability for Bitcoin to outpace absolutely everything else in the market is so high, potentially, that it's a fool's game trying to beat it. So don't even bother. And anything that you don't buy that vehicle with, i.e. Bitcoin in self-custody, then consider it like a donation to something and don't ever expect to see it come back. Again, this is a work in progress. It's something I'm trying to figure through, because what resonated very strongly recently was the idea of putting Bitcoin into someone else's fund, so a Bitcoin denominated fund. So rather than saying, give me 250,000 US minimum ticket, which is often the threshold, or 100,000 pounds or something. So, okay, well, how are they going to outpace Bitcoin? What will Bitcoin be in 10 years' time? Like that, I mean, it's anyone's guess, right? Whereas if I give you one Bitcoin, it's very clear. You give me back one Bitcoin plus whatever the carry is. So I think that's an easier sell to a Bitcoin holder. But then how you actually like structure that, and I mean, that's the job of the capital allocator, essentially, is to figure that out. It's like, okay, how are you going to do it? And then what companies or project, I don't even know. I don't know how anyone's actually going to achieve that. I don't know. So I'll have to keep digging. Daniel, I want to try and bring it to a close. And I've got one last question for you, which is really like, what's got you most excited about the next 12 months?
I think what I'm interested to see is the Bitcoin's going to do what it's going to do, right? We are, at time of recording, almost a year after the halving, and people think the bull has happened.
Yeah.
They have no idea what's coming.
It's all over, guys. We hit 79K today. US. Everyone's got to go home.
So I'm looking forward to the holy shit moments that people are going to experience over the next 18 months when what I believe is going to plays out, which is going to be again, pricing in dollar terms, a huge increase. It's going to release a lot of people from their day job, I hope. That's
so cool, that, isn't it? Wave of like free men and women.
So
but like
exciting.
It's yeah. Maybe it's the couples actually. It's the men and the women, right? It's like, babe, you don't have to go to work. One.
Yeah.
And then two, give a couple more months, I'm out as well. Yeah, epic.
And the ripple effect that has on the space, because they're going to feel the same as you and I. we didn't just exit and that's it. Thanks very much. Land on a beach. It's like, no, we want to give back as much as possible to educate as many more people as we can about what's going on. And this is the grassroots level movement. So I would say it's really, really exciting to think about the brain power that gets released from one system into another that's going to happen over the next 12 to 18 months.
Yeah, epic. And I said I had one last question, but then I thought I've got to ask one more, which is, if you had one last orange pill, who would you give it to and why?
I've heard this one before. Yeah. I always used to say Greta, because I really despise the negative effect she's had on teenage kids with all of this nonsense narrative that she's
dare you?
Yeah, that she's been pushing. I've seen it affect my own kids. Luckily,
wow,
we're
it's
strong
very
enough.
Compelling, is it? Coming from her? Maybe, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm just thinking about all of those lost teenage kids out there that not only are they locked away in classrooms, can't think for themselves, but they've got this negative mindset about the world. They're afraid for the future. They have no hope, nothing to grab onto. They think the world is going to fall out of the sky, and it's all us nasty humans that have done this. It's crazy. So yeah, I've been saying in a long time I'd like to orange pill her so she can reverse that. But closer to home, my parents, my wife's parents, our families, we still pretty much stand alone on this hill, and it's a tough one because they're the ones that you want to be safe from any economic meltdown, which, like we said at the beginning here, it's happened. I mean, people in Britain, they feel insulated. They didn't go into the euro. They've always got their pounds. But there's a digital pound coming, and pounds have also changed. 1971, you didn't have pounds and pence. Up until that point, you had shillings and all of this old funny money. Do you remember your nan? Your nan probably still counts in old money, but she might even say, "Oh, how much does that cost in old money?" Like well, she's referring to the money she grew up with, right? So that generation, they got rug pulled. Half pennies, shillings. I don't even remember. Have you ever even seen them? Do you know what they even look like?
No,
Threepenny bits.
Pence was always for me. Yeah.
So it has happened on these shores, but people aren't awake to it. So yeah, I would love for my our immediate family. So yeah, I'd mix the orange peel into the punch bowl.
We can split it up a few times. Yeah, one's nearest and dearest is the hardest. Really, and I've tried multi different ways, and just recently had a very strong experience that's like, leave us alone. And it wasn't just around that specific subject; it was around a whole lot of other things. And I'm not going to talk about it on this podcast, but it's really hard. It's really hard. So yeah, that resonates very strongly. Well, Daniel Prince, legend. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Jake. Thanks for stepping back into the ring, brother. It's great to see somebody else out there having these conversations and doing the work. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.